All right, guys, so this is Inquiry 4.2, the procedure for Lab 4.2. So on this lab, we're going to be changing the load versus changing the surface. So you're going to be changing the load for each surface that we test. So we're going to have 5 different surfaces, and we're going to be testing how changing the load affects the force of friction. So in the last lab, 4.1, we looked at how changing the surface affected the force of friction. And we saw that some surfaces had a greater force of friction required to drag the block than others. So this time we're going to exclusively look at load in this. So this is going to be all on the same slide here. We're going to go around to some different places on the screen, and we're going to be filling in information. So when I tell you to pause the video, because I'm going to pause my video and resume recording for each step. So this will all be on one slide. So there won't be a lot of moving around like normal. All right, so number 1, under the procedure for 4.2. In your science notebook, answer this question. Think about and discuss the following with your lab group. What will happen to the effort force needed to pull a block when you change the weight of a block? So what will happen to the effort force needed to pull a block if you change the weight of the block? So make a prediction in your science notebook. All right, if you need more time, pause. Number 2, this inquiry requires you and your lab group as a team to collaborate with teams in the other class. All right, so for this, this on the virtual side, I'm going to sit here and we're going to talk through the data, and you're going to put the data in your notebook. You will need an additional sheet of paper for this since you're virtual. You will not have this lab sheet since this is a new sheet. So on a sheet of paper, you're going to draw the tables here that I'll show you in a few minutes. So the tables you see to the right, you're going to be drawing those on a sheet of paper, and you're going to put those in your science notebook. All right, so 3, you don't have to worry about designing a data table because the data table is to the right, and I'll take that over in a minute. And you're going to measure the weight of the load on each trial. So we're going to look at each of the different surface types. All right, so number 4, in this lab, you're going to change the weight of the load by stacking the wooden blocks. I'll show you a video of that here in just a moment before we get started talking about data. Number 5, you're going to graph the data, and that is something you guys are going to do. And I'll show you exactly where that's going to go in a moment also. But you should have picked up your student sheet when you picked up your engineering notebook. I'm not sure, your science notebook for you guys that are working on this at home. So if you do not, you need to pause the video and restart this when you actually have your science notebook and your data sheets. Otherwise, you can print these off. If that's not an option, you can handwrite these, but that's a whole lot of effort versus just getting the sheet from the office. All right, so number 6, you don't have to worry about doing because you're going to have all of the data on your sheets because we're going to go over it together. And number 7, we're going to compare the data with the different surfaces. Again, everything's going to be on your sheet. And think about the variables in this investigation. What did you keep constant as you change the weight of the load? Record your answers. Okay, so that is number 8 there. So number 8, it says, what did you keep constant as we change the weight of the blocks? Think about the things that you need to keep constant because we're changing the load. So what are the factors in the experiment that need to be constant? Pause the video and add that in your science notebook. All right, so let's get going with some data. So if you need to catch up on 6 or 7 on the screen here, so make sure you've answered 6, 7, and 8 in your science notebook, and we will get started here in one moment. All right, so before we get started talking about data, watch this little short clip And this is what you guys would be doing in lab if you were here. So you would be doing what I'm doing on the screen for each of the surfaces that were listed. So you do this on the tabletop, the wax paper, the paper towel, the fine sandpaper, and the coarse sandpaper. And you check your data for each as you go. But we'll talk more in a moment. So watch this short video, and this is what you would literally be doing. All right, so as you're adding each block, notice the force that's required to pull each of the blocks. It gets increasingly more difficult as you add blocks. And notice I've maxed out my scale there on the third block. So I've got to move to the stronger 10 Newton scale so that we can get a reading to pull that third block. And the fourth block, again, qualitatively, you can see that, hey, those are a little harder to pull as you continue to add more and more blocks. So that would have been the tabletop. So if you were in class, you would have changed to the next surface and taken another round of data. So we're going to rotate over to the student sheet. You guys need to take out a sheet of paper, and you guys are going to set these tables up on notebook paper, unless you're at school, in which case you can get this from the bin. All right, guys, so before we go any further, we need to make a slight change to your table that we have added here before you get started taking data. This is an insert if this looks weird, so make sure you change this on your table. That way your data will not look weird. So right here, we're going to change these to trial numbers. And here, we're going to change this to number of blocks. So those little blocks we showed on the screen a second ago, we're going to change each of these tables. So we're going to change it here, here, and for each of the other tables. So pause the video at this point. I'm going to scroll down. Make sure you make these changes here and here to every one of the 5 little charts that we have here. So that's 3. You'll do the same thing here, here, and then the final one here and here. So even if you come and get a copy of this from the school, make sure you change this on your table. So I'll change it on the screen just so you have a visual showing what I'm talking about. So this needs to be number of blocks. And this needs to be trial number. So we're just going to change all those real quick. Okay, so the rest of the video, you may not see those little notes, so just make sure you correct that at this point before you get to the rest of the video. All right, so this is your first table. You're going to be drawing these in on a sheet of paper, which you'll then put in your science notebook. So set the columns up just like this. You should have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns, and fill everything in the way you see it. So here, this is the label for the surface. This is going to be your tabletop data. Under it, you have trial number, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 trials. And then you've got the number of blocks. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. We're going to go over the different trial information for each of these, and then we'll take the average of the force of friction. So I'm going to scroll down through these, pause the video as you get to each table, and you can copy these down on a sheet of paper. So here's the tabletop, pause the video to get that. There's the paper towel table, so pause the video to get that one. Here's your wax paper table. Pause your video to get that one. Here is your fine sandpaper table. Pause it to get that one. And final table is your coarse sandpaper table. So pause and get that one. Again, these are available in the office if you go to the school to get them. Otherwise, you can just copy them down. All right, so now let's start going through some data. Let's go back up to the top. So go to the very first table for your tabletop data, and we will pick up there. All right, so on the tabletop, we're going to record our data that we got as we did these. So for the tabletop, with one block, we had, for trial 1, an initial force of 0.59. For 2, we had 0.61. And then for 3 and 4, we had 0.60 and 0.60. For trial 2, it was a little more difficult. Notice what happened to our effort force, or our force of friction here. It a little more than doubled. So trials 1 and 2, we had 120, and then we had 118, and then for trial 4, we had 122. All right, for 3, notice what happens to our force of friction. So 1.80, 1.65, and 1.95. And our final one, once we add the fourth block, our force of friction was 210, so 2.10, 2.15, and 2.20. Oops, sorry. So for that third trial, you should have 2.35 and then 2.20 for trial 4. All right, so for these, for this column over here, you have to get the average. So you're going to take this plus this plus this plus this and divide it by 4, which is the average, how you get the average. So we're going to add all of trial 1 together, and we're going to get the average for those. And the average was 0.60. For trial 2, well, sorry, for 2 blocks, our average was 1.20. For 3 blocks, our average was 1.80. And for 4 blocks, our average was 2.20. So notice what happened to our average force of friction as you added another block. You'll notice that it went up. It didn't double every time, but it did go up. All right, so we'll come back to these values shortly. All right, so for the paper towel, you'll notice that you'll notice as we start taking data. All right, so for 1 block on trial 1, sorry about that, had a system glitch there. So for on the paper towel on trial 1 for 1 block, we had a force reading of 1.7. For 2 blocks, for trial 2, we had 1.6. For trial 3, we had 1.55. And trial 4, we had 1.50. All right, adding a second block. For trial 1, we saw our force increase to 2.75. Trial 2, we got 2.80. Trial 3, 2.75. And trial 4, 2.80. All right, adding a third block. notice what happens to our force there. It goes up to 3.5. So we get that for 2 trials. Trial 3 comes to 3.75, and then trial 4 again is 3.5. So adding a 4th block, we get 4.15, 4.35, 4.0, and 4.0. So again, we're going to average each of the trials. So for trial 1, not for each of trial 1, sorry. For 1 block, we get an average force of 1.59. For 2 blocks, we get an average force of 2.78. For 3 blocks, we get an average force of 3.56. And for 4 blocks, we get an average force of 4.13. So again, notice what happens to the friction, force of friction here as you increase the mass. This is the one for the paper towel, and then, sorry, this is the one for the tabletop, and then this is the one for the paper towel. So notice what happens as you increase your mass. All right, so wax paper. So on this one, for 1 block, we got 0.8, 0.6, 0.6, and 0.55. Didn't write that one real clearly, sorry about that. All right, for 2 blocks, we got 0.75, 0.80, 0.70, and 0.85. All right, adding a 3rd block, we got 1.50, 1.25, 1.35, and 1.20. All right, adding the 4th block, we got 1.80, 1.85. For trial 3, we got 1.75. And trial 4, we also got 1.75. All right, so again, we're going to average the forces. So we're going to add each of the trials together and divide it by 4 because we've got 4 trials. So for 1 block, we got 0.64 as our average. For 2 blocks, we got 0.78. 3 blocks, 1.38. Sorry, 1.35. And for 4 blocks, 1.79. All right, 2 more to go. So for our fine sandpaper, for 1 block, we got 1.5, 1.90, 1.60, and 2.00. All right, for 2 blocks, we got 3.5, 3.65, 4.0, and 3.70. Adding a 3rd block, we got 5.80, 5.00, 5.00, and 4.75. Finally, for the 4th block, you got 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, and 5.85. So again, we're going to find the average force of those. We're going to add those together and divide them by 4. So you would have gotten for 1 block, 1.75, 3.71, 5.14, and 6.34. So again, for these last 2 that we just did, notice again what happens as we're increasing our load. What's happening to the friction. All right, final one Sorry, this is so tedious, guys. There's not another way to make this any better because recording the spring scales is not very good. All right, so the coarse sandpaper, here's your last one. For one block, we had 2.15, 1.80, 1.85, and 2.10. Adding a second block, we got 3.45, 3.25, 3.5, and 3.60. Adding a third block, we got 5.00, 5.25, 4.50, and 4.25. Last trial, we got 6.75, 7.00, 7.15, and 6.50. All right, so again, we're going to take the average of these, add each of the trials together, and divide it by 4. So for one block, we got 1.98. For two blocks, we got 3.45. For three blocks, we got 4.75. And for four blocks, we got 6.50. So again, the same thing that we've seen on each of the trials thus far. And for each surface, as you increase the mass or you increase the load, again, notice what's happening to our force as we're increasing our load. All right, guys, so final part. This is on the back of your student sheet that you see here. So changing the load. This here, it had a note here saying the tables on the printed sheet. So this is talking about this stuff of the directions here. Well, these are the tables that you did over here. So these 5 tables. So what we're going to do is we're going to be taking the average force from each of these 5 tables and we're going to be adding it to the graph. So our title for the graph is simply our x-axis times our y-axis. So it's going to be it's going to be number of blocks versus average force. All right, so you have your data sheets out to the side. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this. So everyone should have the same data since we did this together. So as we do this, just do this on your own graph and make sure you set your graph up as you see mine here. And I'm just going to erase these lines. That way it doesn't throw off our stuff in a moment. All right, so some of these points will intersect, which is not a big deal. So I'm going to color code them to help make it a little easier. So our tabletop was our first piece of data. So at one block, we had an average force of 0.6. So here's one block, here's 1. So 0.6 would be about right here. So we'll put a dot right about there. All right, for 2 blocks, so we're going to go over to 2 here. And it was 1.2, so 1.2 is about right there. All right, so I'm going to stop highlighting these with the laser and then just start marking these. At 3 blocks, our tabletop force of friction was 1.80. So it'll be about right there. And then 4, our 4th block for the tabletop was 2.20. So it'd be about like that. All right. We'll come back to do a line of best fit in a moment. Let's go ahead and graph our paper towel average forces. So for one block, we had 1.59. So again, we're coming back over here. We'll go up to about 1.59, which is somewhere about right there. All right, for 2 blocks, we had 2.78. So follow the line on the x-axis going up from 2 blocks. So 2.78 would be about right there. 3 blocks, we had 3.56. So from the x, so go on the x-axis here to 3, and we'll go up to 3.56, which is about right there. And then for block 4, we'll go up to 4.13. So again, 4.13 is about right there. All right, next piece of data, we're doing our wax paper. So we've got, for one block, 0.64. So it's gonna be about right there, kind of near covering up that other dot, but it's kind of close, so we'll make one dot a little smaller. For 2, we got it was just 0.78. So 0.78 is kind of about right there. 3 blocks, 1.35. So about right in there. And then our 4th block was 1.79. So about right there. All right, 3 out of 4 done. So let's change it up here. Let me make a color for orange. All right, so for our first block, for the fine sandpaper, we had 1.75, so that's about right there. For 2 blocks, we had 3.71, so that's about right there. For the 3rd block, we had 5.14, which is about right there. And for our 4th block, it was 6.31. So something about right there-ish. All right, and our final data point before we do our line of best fit here. I'll kind of do a turquoise, that way it's kind of a different color and you can see it better. So for 1 block, we've got 1.98, so that'd be about right there. Try not to cover up that other block. 3.45 for 2 blocks. So kind of about right there. For the 3rd block, we have 4.75. So about right there. And finally, 6.88 for the 4th block. So 4 all the way up here near the top. This will be the tallest point on our graph here. All right. So now we're going to kind of do a rough line of straight fit. I'm going to pause for just a second and pull up another tool for you. Okay, so no such luck. So I'm going to try to freehand this. So a line of best fit for the coarse sandpaper, this is the turquoise line, will kind of be something about like this. It's kind of going to go near all of these points, kind of go up right there. All right. For the fine sandpaper, we're going to get something very similar to that, but it's going to be just slightly above it. And if you have a straight edge, you can do these a little more cleanly than what I've got going here. All right, so for the wax paper, we kind of have something that goes like that. For the paper towel in red, we're going to be looking at something like that. And then our final is for our tabletop, and we'd be looking at something like that. All right. So we'll pause the video at this point and we'll cut to our questions that remain here. Actually, I take that back. So this table will wrap up 4.2. So make sure you have your table completed and your graph. There's a little bit on 4.3, but that's another day's work, and we'll wrap up our reflection questions and our reading selections at a different time. So again, your major take home from this, guys, I know this was kind of drawn out. It's just kind of the nature of this one, not being in the classroom. So notice what happened as our masses increased, regardless of the surface that you were on. As the mass increases, your force of friction also increased. All right, so sorry for the long video, guys, but that will conclude 4.2's procedure. We will wrap up with 4.3 next time.